data fabric and data mesh in a modern data architecture. As participants in this discussion, you may know that ERMAC's history goes back to 1971. We are an integral part of DAMA International here in Canada, and we offer certification and training in data management. We are excited to have this presentation. I'm now going to pass it over to Eden, our communications director. And we're going to learn some things. I think one of the things when I prepared for this with Emerson a little while ago, I said, hey, can you differentiate data mesh from data fabric? Can you also give us some use cases for this architecture and architectural pattern? And I think it should be an very interesting conversation. We'll take questions at the end. Eden, over to you.
Thanks so much, Mark. So welcome everyone to the monthly ERMAC webinar. As usual, I am Eden, the communications director for ERMAC. And as you've noticed, I'm joined by Mark, our vice president of ERMAC, who is very excited to be here as well. And to follow up on some of the things that we discussed during our annual general meeting last month. I'm also joined as usual by Nick, our director of online content, who will be monitoring the YouTube chat for your questions during the presentation and asking them at the end, and without whose support we would not be bringing you this stream today. And I am also joined today by our speaker, Emerson Gatchalian, who, as Mark mentioned, is going to be talking about data mesh, data fabric, and data governance at scale. But before I tell you a little bit more about Emerson, I am going to tell you a little bit more about ERMAC's sponsor, InfoSet. InfoSet helps small and medium businesses extract value from their data, and they provide us with the resources to bring these streams to you. So we're very grateful to have their support. So today we're hearing from Emerson Gatchalian about modern analytics and governance at scale. Emerson is a field CTO from Microsoft's global Black Belt cloud scale analytics organization. He has over 26 years of industry experience, from design engineering, consulting, to data platform operations and enterprise analytics solutions and architecture. He is a thought leader and has been working with C-levels, data leaders, and partners to design and implement different cloud scale solutions according to organizations' needs worldwide. Thank you so much for joining us today, Emerson. We're very glad to have you here, and we're very interested to hear everything you have to say on the topic. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass it off to you and let you take it away, Emerson.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Just sharing my screen. Are you able to see it?
Yep, able to see it with no problems.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me, and really excited to share some of the contents that we have when it comes to modern analytics and governance at scale. A lot of this will come out fairly soon with documentations, what have you. But for now, would love to share some of the contents that we have, recommendations that we have from Microsoft, things that we've been doing inside Microsoft, our own implementation, but also implementations from other clients that we're kind of like learning from, making sure they are actually successful, what have you. So a lot of that will be kind of like packed here so that it will be used by the wider community. Again, my name is Manuel Emerson Gatchalian, Field CTO from Microsoft. And I'll start off with some of the things that we have heard from our clients. So let me just quickly get to my laser here. Perfect. With this, basically, we have a lot of conversations with a lot of the CXOs. In my role as part of the global Black Belt team, I get pulled into conversations worldwide with CDOs, VP of data, CIO, even security officers, data leaders, what have you, all the way down to the architecture. My background came as well from architecture from within Microsoft for 5 years. So a lot of the learnings that we've had from deployment, implementation, all the way to now, strategy, what have you, is kind of like shared in this content as well. Of course, working with cross organizations within Microsoft globally, so that everything that you heard here is not just from Emerson, but basically from a wider kind of like scope within Microsoft. Some of the things I'm not going to drain this slide, but some of the things that we've heard from our clients are these problems, right? They've been sharing that they've been having data governance problems. A lot of our clients would like to embark analytics, would like to embark more, machine learning projects, data science, what have you. But we've heard from our clients, hey, you know what? We've been kind of like getting into this project 6 months into it. We realized that we cannot really proceed with the project. They realize that they don't have enough data. They realize that the data could not be integrated. They realize that the data is not clean, right? And also they don't know where the other data sets are located. So like even just the simple as cataloging that data, it's hard to know if this data in the catalog is how to call this, accurate, or kind of like worse is kind of like, hey, we don't even have a catalog at this moment, right? So all of that is tied to that governance conversation. Now, a lot of our clients has really embraced cloud Azure in kind of like modernizing, migrating their on-prem data and analytics projects into the cloud. So they get all the security that they're looking for, they get all the agility, all the performance, what have you, right? But what has been happening is because there's so many projects, accelerating the business, it tends to, for different organizations, to have siloed data and analytic solutions. There is the data warehousing motions. There is like the data mart motions. There's like the data lake motions. There's a lot of BI projects and there's a lot of machine learning projects. So if you think about it, projects come in and basically, which environment should we use, right? Should we use this data lake for warehousing, what have you? And everyone's kind of just, just use the data warehouse or use the data lake. So there's no kind of like clear guidance as to where should, where should this projects land? And that's why part of that is, recommending some of that in this presentation. Maybe I'll name another one from out of these things that we've heard from our clients. They would like to unify the whole ecosystem. They would like to have the different lines of business to become autonomous, meaning, we don't have, IT has been really great for them. But the reality is with the amount of projects that's coming in, IT is kind of like, not have enough resources, what have you, to build data engineering pipelines, to build dashboards and report, or machine learning, right? So the solution becoming is like, hey, what if we provide all the environment to the line of business, we provide them the data and let them build their reports, for example. That will kind of alleviate some of the workloads from IT. And this is something that lines of business can implement, right? So part of that is kind of like, how do we do that? How do we unify the ecosystem with data governance in mind? How do we make sure that the data and analytics operations are in place so that we don't have different, motions or lines of businesses implementing different things? We want to make sure that, hey, we're enabling them, but at the same time, we want to make sure that it's properly governed, if you will, right? And so with that, this is directly kind of like information that we got from our clients. But how about what's really research is telling us? So I've been kind of working with our data innovation in Canada, Mike Davison, and he shared some of the research papers, right? This is actually done by MIT. And basically, this is something that kind of clarifies where the gap is. A lot of us are very technical. We love technology, right? But even if we provide a lot of capabilities from a technology perspective, we're only really helping organization 8% of the time, right? A lot of the struggles for organizations to become data-driven is also heavy on the culture, on the people, on the processes, right? And if you look here, what does good look like for organizations? By the way, this research is based on 351 clients globally, different regions, what have you. This is CXOs, VP of data, leaders, what have you. These are kind of like problems that they're trying to solve, and that's kind of like their feedback, right? What does good look like? Data reduce of duplication is number one. Number two is like ease of access to data. Use case that I mentioned earlier. I want to do machine learning or even just simple dashboards and reports, and I don't have access to data. So I'm basically doing status quo reports or machine learning based on the status quo data that gets provided to me. But innovation is about finding new things, getting new data sets to kind of integrate so that I can build better insights for the business, right? Data engineering, data quality, it's all in here. And on the right side here, what holds companies back? Data management is really critical, right? How do you make sure that the flow from the time you pull the data from the sources all the way to storing that data into like a centralized or federated manner, all the way to the consumption. How do you kind of make sure all of that is properly, implemented? Slow data processing, so on and so forth. I'm not going to train all of this slide, but I hope kind of this clarifies why Microsoft is doing this now, providing our recommendations. What is our guidance moving forward for clients, beyond technology, including people and processes. So with that, I'm going to just kind of give you a bit of a background how we came about with modern analytics and governance at scale. So if you think here, modern analytics governance at scale came from different kind of like IPs, if you will. First off, very critical, very important, this came from our own Microsoft implementation, right? If you think about Microsoft, we are one of the biggest clients of Azure. So you think about Xbox, LinkedIn, we have all marketing, all the customer information. Think about Azure itself. We're generating so much data of Azure, and how do we kind of manage it? And this is the practice that we are kind of like now sharing. A lot of these IPs are in this contents came from our Microsoft digital thought leadership, right? Culture transformation, responsible mesh is how we call it in Microsoft, because we're not purists of data mesh. There are aspects of it that we support, which I'm going to go deeper a little bit, but we want to make sure that we're providing you the right implementation aligned to data mesh with some of the other things that we have here as part of the Microsoft digital implementation. Also, we have the cloud adoption framework. So if you're a client of Microsoft, you've heard about this. These are recommendations on how you implement networking. How do you implement subscription governance, for example? We extended this with data with help from our worldwide CSU. So we extended this so that we have recommendations on how you actually architect your data end-to-end data environment. Next is our global black belt engagements. A lot of these are learnings globally, conversations with CXOs, learnings from Apple implementations, from the data leaders, all the way down to the architects and developers, talking about data mesh, talking about data fabric, data hub, right? And kind of learnings as to what worked and what didn't work. So all of that is packed into this. Together, some of what we are going to be releasing as part of our product and capabilities release. We're not gonna, talk about roadmap today, but what we know is what we're recommending now is aligned to the future of where Microsoft is going. And last but not the least is around the core principles of data mesh, the federation, the governance. So we all kind of pack them together and kind of build this modern analytics and governance at scale. Now, thinking about this kind of like specific conversations with clients, if we ask them, what's your top three, focus this year or in the coming years? And these are the three that I always kind of get mentioned. Number one is I would like to serve data. We would like to serve data in analytics to the needs of the different lines of businesses. At the end of the day, we want the lines of businesses to be successful, right? And that is providing data and tools to make insights so that they can make better decisions, they can predict, and they can forecast, what have you. Next one is unifying this whole thing, right? Because as mentioned earlier, there's so many solutions out there, but kind of having a one kind of like picture of how we're doing this end-to-end analytic ecosystem is critical for them. And then at the same time, the third one, they want to cut costs by introducing efficiencies. There are conversations about duplication. There are conversations about, having overlapping solutions, what have you. We don't want to kind of say, build it and kind of optimize from there. That has been the pattern in the past. Now, because we have a lot of learnings already, we got best practices. We want you to be saving, right from the get-go, being more kind of like conservative in a way that we want to make sure that you're meeting your goals, but at the same time, we don't want to be overbuilding anything, right? As to what is data mesh, from a Microsoft perspective, this is how we recommend building data mesh. Our goal is to enable different lines of businesses. So the goal is to provide environment for each of the lines of businesses. And then from there, they can build their own data products. They become more autonomous in a way that they can now build their own data products or insights out of the different data sets that's within the organization. Governance is in the middle of it. Polyglot store, this is where we store all the data. We got Delta Lake as the recommended practice, but we understand that you have data that's coming from operational databases. We can discuss more deeper into that, but just want to make sure that this Polyglot data store is as part of the hub in the middle, right? And then how do we automate some of this data management, which I'm going to go deeper later. I just want to show here that what we're recommending is aligned to data mesh. The domain-driven architecture, data as a product, self-serve infrastructure as a platform, and then the federated computational governance, which I'm going to go deeper a little bit later. Now, why data mesh, right? Well, why is this something that a lot of organizations are embracing? And this is something that is, very kind of like, it's the pattern has been there in the past, using data marts, what have you. Now, this is like more modern way of kind of implementing, autonomous capabilities for the different lines of businesses. But the goal is here in this example, if you build multiple domains and then enable the different lines of businesses, give them their own domains. As an example, finance. Finance can build a data product and say, hey, you know what, for last year or for the past few months, what are the top selling products? What are the products that are at the bottom, not selling, not doing well? So now you have understanding of where profit is going, right? So that's pretty cool. Finance can do it. Now, what about marketing? Marketing can now say, hey, what would be the marketing campaign that I need to do so that we can become more successful in the coming months or years? So you can look at the history or like the information that you got from the data, the products, right? If we say that the 5 at the bottom are that has good potential, maybe we should build more marketing campaigns for those. Maybe we should push those, or maybe it could be the other way around. Hey, we're getting successful on the top 3. What if we market them more so that we can get the most out of it? And then that becomes your marketing campaign data insight, right? Now from there, operations, now knowing defined, marketing campaign, because the data product is there, you can take this and say, hey, we know that this 5 product is going to be pushed by marketing in the next 3 months or in the next year. Now we can build our operations planning, right? We should hire more people. Maybe we should probably have more raw materials so that we can build this product, so on and so forth. So if you think about it, data mesh, what it does is basically we're using insights to make more insights, creating that mesh. So if you think about it, if without this kind of like data products from operations, I have to figure out, talk to finance, talk to marketing, hey, what's the best way for me to make sure my operations is well? You have to get all the raw data coming from here, do some aggregations, figure it out with marketing, so on and so forth. That's probably weeks, if not months, of kind of like understanding what my plans should be, right? But because of data mesh, now you can start reusing defined data products so that you can build your own insight within your line of business to make better decision, better data products for yourself, right? In regards to Microsoft position, I just want to make sure I am calling on this out. All right. Microsoft, we focus on organizations' challenges and what's your vision. If you kind of like say, I don't have a clear vision yet, we can help, right? But we are not here to position a framework. We're not here to sell data mesh or data fabric. We would like to focus on your, challenges, and that's why we started on what we've heard. So when you engage with us, please, share with us your challenges and strategic vision, and then we can land this framework or our recommendations fitting to your needs. Next one is we provide a North Star, right? We can provide you all the technologies, the capabilities, what have you, but the ask from our clients is help us kind of make sure we're aligning this to our people, to our processes, to make sure we're really successful. And lastly, but not least here, we support data mesh, aspects of data mesh and data fabric, but we are not purist of it. There are aspects of, the different frameworks that we say, hey, you know what, it probably worked for a few clients, but we've seen within our own implementation and other clients that it won't work. With that being said, you will still clearly see, the important things that to consider when implementing end-to-end analytics, regardless of the framework. Now, going to the solution at a high level, modern analytics and governance at scale, there's 3 composable solutions. One is enterprise governance, second is automated data operations, and then the unified analytics ecosystem. So just a high level, enterprise governance will take care of, cataloging, data quality, policies, lineage. Next one will be the automation. How do you kind of provision domains out of the templates, for example? How do you build services like ingestion services so that it's much more automated and much more kind of intelligent, if you will? I'm gonna go deeper into this a bit later. And then next one, the third one is how do you unify all of this? How do you unify the different analytics capabilities? How do you implement the federation, while unifying, right? We made it composable simply because we have clients who have already data governance and they just want to implement the automation. In this case, we don't have to worry about this, then implement automation. Or we have clients who doesn't want to federate, but they need data governance and automation, so they can pick these two solutions, right? So we want it to be flexible, and at the same time, we want to simplify it. Because it's complex to kind of think about a framework and how you deploy it. But if you're focusing on the needs on governance, data operations, and unification, you have these pillars to think about, right? Just checking out time here very quickly. Now, I'm going to go now directly to the enterprise data governance. Microsoft's recommendation is leverage automated capabilities so that data governance or data management should not be manual and complicated. Start with the foundation. So from our perspective, this is why we built Azure Purview, is that for data governance, you should have line of sight to all your data, whether it's on-premise, whether it's in Azure, whether it's in AWS, for example, right? Automatically, when you scan this environment, automatically building catalog is important. So we have this in Purview, automatically classifying the data, meaning is the data PII data? Is it, salary information? Is it credit card? I'm sorry. Is it SIN? Is it kind of like confidential data that we should secure? So this is critical because a lot of our clients, when we talk about them, hey, what's your kind of like understanding about your existing profile of confidential data? And usually the response is, I know what I know. I know what, the different lines of business know, but because we got terabytes and petabytes of data, there might be some data out there that we don't really interact with on a daily basis that might be confidential without our kind of like awareness, right? So that's why data classification automatically is critical so that when you scan the environment, you can detect them, and we have custom classifiers as well that can help you if you need more than the 200, I believe now that we have to classify data. Now, the goal here is you classify data and then so what? And so now in Preview, what we have is data policy. So that when your data is considered classified, say, for example, you have a data in the data lake that is considered PII, then you can say, hey, use this workflow so that for any PII data related to SIN, for example, then you can only allow specific group, like maybe HR, a specific person or group within HR to have access to these files, as an example. So there is a, how do you call it, an action based on what you identified in the classification. I'm not going to drain all these capabilities. I'm starting with the foundational aspects of it. Lineage, of course, is very critical. We automatically do this as part of the tool. But because Azure Purview as well is based on open source Apache Atlas, you can build custom kind of like capabilities based on your needs. So we provide you the foundational ones, and we continue adding more capabilities. If you're a client of ours, reach out to us and we can share some of the roadmap. But for now, this is some kind of like the foundational aspects of mesh and governance that is critical. One kind of like last thing that I would like to touch upon, before moving into the next solution is the data use governance. Data use governance is, for example, a scenario where our clients would like to build a catalog, right? Which we can do in Purview. But beyond that, they would like to enable lines of businesses, data analysts, data product developers, data scientists. They would like them to have the capability that if they see a data in the catalog, they don't have access to data yet, but because they see the metadata, they see the classification, they see the business glossary and lineage, what have you, for example, right? That they can request access to the data so that they can enrich their data science projects or their reports, or maybe they're just kind of like trying to understand if they can build a project, right? And this data will help this other project, this other data project. So in Preview right now, under Preview, you can request for that data. If that is in Azure, it will go through a workflow and it will go to a data owner. And once that's approved, you can actually provide access instantaneously into this data in Azure. What we're doing with our partners is, what if it's that data is in Oracle, for example? A lot of our clients don't want analytics on top of Oracle, for example, operational data stores, right? The security, performance is, one of the reasons there. Plus, cloud reaching into your operational data stores, they have, tight security. They don't want to do that. But rather what we're working with our partners is rather than kind of giving access directly to Oracle, we take the metadata coming from the catalog, server names, table names, and who requested to it, and we onboard this data from Oracle into Azure. So rather than doing manual pipelines, for example, waiting for 6 weeks to get access, what have you, we automate this and then onboard in Azure. And now because it's now in Azure, that access can be provided, right? So think about kind of like that acceleration of getting data, access to data to kind of serve it to multiple lines of businesses. It's there, regardless it's in on-premise or in Azure. So you will be able to have kind of like new data for your new insights that you want to build, as an example. How we're actually recommending as to, how do we implement governance? We have, documentation in this. This is just a kind of like a quick summary. For you to implement purview and data governance, start with planning and organizational readiness. What are the different, data sources that I need? Start identifying and documenting sources, and then define the roles and responsibilities. And then now you can start preparing the environment, your Azure environment, scan the different sources, what have you, so on and so forth. So I just want to kind of leave this one here, and then we have documentations that you can use that actually explains a lot of this in much more detail. I'm going to go now to automated data and analytics operations. So part of the implementations that we have internally in Microsoft and other clients is the capability so that if a new line of business need a new environment, that we can build this environment in few hours, 2 hours, for example, and not months, right? Building a new environment from ground up, building the conceptual architecture, all that physical architecture, in a lot of implementation could take up to 6 months, right? So that's why we're using template-based implementation. We have this accelerator right now. It's in GitHub. Feel free to use them. We can share that in the link below later. But the goal is to kind of like get this environment ready to be deployed in 2 hours, 3 hours, what have you, without having to design, making sure networking is properly done, or auditing, monitoring is kind of like another thing you need to worry about. We all kind of package all of that together, and you can say, I want Databricks in there, I want Synapse in there, I want Cosmos DB in there, for example, and it will just be deployed, right? So all of the important things is packaged so that it's ready for deployment. It could be a starting point. A lot of our clients use that to start with, but they can start converting them to Terraform scripts, for example, to move forward so that you can deploy it, because a lot of our clients are using Terraform. But the goal is to kind of have this deployment kind of like easy to be available for the different lines of business. Data source onboarding, I mentioned earlier. This is, say I have a project, 200 different data sources on-prem. We can give you the list of the server and the table names. We can onboard it in Azure because of the the recommendation to build this automation and template-based implementation. Like, for example, data agnostic ingestion. We have clients who have actually Informatica implementations, right? And it takes, there's 4,000 Informatica pipelines, and they say, hey, you know what? It will take me forever to convert this to Azure Data Factory. But what we say is, hey, you don't have to do that. Maybe use your existing pipeline, but rather than kind of like storing this data on-prem, you can start pushing that data into a drop zone in Azure. Or you can use a new ingestion framework where you can pull sources from the different, data sources on-prem, and then start standardizing all this data. So the data agnostic ingestion, regardless of the format that gets drops in here, or the format that you pull it from, CSV, TSV, 4K, what have you, it doesn't matter, right? It's data agnostic, regardless of HR, marketing, what have you. It will just basically take this format and start standardizing into a Delta format. For example, this is Microsoft recommendation, get Delta format implemented in your data lake, and then start kind of following your data lake taxonomy. So that's part of that standardization. Could be around the PII handling or merging the data. You have snapshots every day that will be merged to the set that you have containing 10 years worth of data. So that could be it. Start doing light data quality work. This could be micro data services that say, hey, the data now is landed in the standardized format. I want to start deduplicating the data. I want to start making sure the threshold, say if you have a column, example is temperature, If the temperature should only be between 50 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit, for example, then anything outside that, reject the pipeline. We don't want dirty data coming into this ecosystem. And then once you're happy with it and say, hey, I have a new data set, register that data into Purview. So that data is now now accessible immediately in your data catalog, and people can get order access to it, so on and so forth. And then part of the whole process is access provisioning. Whoever requested that data, then we can provide access to that data in the data lake, right? So kind of like data management, kind of like with automation, what have you. And then again, once the data is in Azure, our recommendation is by default use the data lake and use Delta format as the hub, right? We understand that you have data that are in data warehouse, maybe in Synapse, what have you. You can provide access to it across the different domains so that they can, use the data for their use case. Or you can use other tools to pull data out of it. Maybe Databricks, you can use Spark to read data from a data warehouse, load it in a data frame, and then build your analytics, tie it with some of the data coming from the data lake. And then now you can, implement as a data product using Databricks, for example. HTAP, the hybrid transactional and analytical processing or platform. You can do this if you have SQL database, for example, or Cosmos DB. You can actually use this data without ETL. With Synapse Link, if you're using Synapse, you can connect to these different operational databases, and then you can actually take analytics on top of it without having to move data from these databases into a Delta format, for example. So a flexibility that is important. Checking out time here. I think we're still good. Unified ecosystem. This is the third component. So we said that we're going to be providing environments to the lines of businesses because we want them to be autonomous, right? So the goal here is to have, environment for this and one environment for per line of business, or we can define it in a way that it depends on the organization. We have clients, for example, what they do is they build products like software products, if you will, right? So rather than doing just by line of businesses, they build domains by this products, because it's very kind of like they want to be autonomous and from a product perspective, so they build this environment. Of course, the environment is built by templates. And then from here, the different lines of businesses can consume the different data services. Exploration service, for example, a data order system, which I covered earlier. I'm going to talk about this more a bit later, but this is where inside a domain you can start doing, right? And then from there, the different lines of businesses can start building and sharing data products so they can do their own sales forecast, marketing campaigns, what have you, depending on the domain. So this is where you do that. Now, our clients have been kind of like sharing this kind of like sentiments, if you will. You know what, it's great. You got this different services, you can stitch them together. You got, data factory or integration, you got data science capabilities, but we have to kind of stitch them together, right? We have to kind of build them and making sure it's ready for production deployment. And it became complex for them because, say, every single service, you have to secure them. Every single service, you have to make sure there's governance and compliance. Every single service needs to cover all of this: availability, performance, skills and training, because there are new things, licensing and usage, and then, of course, the observation and monitoring. So in short, it's still complex for our clients. And they said, we want it to be more simple, right? We don't want to worry about which ports is open to the internet. We don't want to kind of worry about, hey, how many clusters do I need to build for data science, for data warehouse, so on and so forth, right? So this is why we built Synapse, right? Synapse is an ecosystem. We deployed it. It has all the code base, for example, coming from Azure Data Factory that we implemented within Synapse. We put it in Synapse so that the orchestration and integration, for example, is already inside the environment. So you don't have to kind of build it as part of the Lego blocks that you're doing, right? It's one block basically. And then management of your pipelines, management of your clusters, from the different engines that you have here. Monitoring these pipelines and services there too, and it's also tightly integrated with DevOps, right? But one thing that I would like to just basically drill in a bit deeper here is around these 4 engines that we have at the bottom here. In Synapse, you have four engines. One is data warehousing, but with machine learning. A lot of our clients, especially, coming from FSIs, they were saying, hey, you know what? I got terabytes and petabytes of data in the data warehouse, but I want to do machine learning. For me to do machine learning, I got to extract this data, move it into the data lake, train my data, and then basically that's the process. It's expensive, it's time consuming, it's not really practical. So rather than pulling data from the data warehouse, what we do is we bring in the machine learning models that you actually have deployed. And now as data is coming inside a data warehouse, you can enable machine learning, as data is coming into your data warehouse. Spark, we have the open source Spark. We contributed a lot to this to become, durable, kind of like more enterprise grade. So if we have clients who want simple data engineering work, machine learning work, they don't need, for example, they said, yeah, we don't need the full-blown Databricks, they can use this, right? Or, later on, I'm going to talk about how Synapse and Databricks work better together. But this is just an example for Spark implementations, you can do this. Serverless SQL, this is, important when it comes to implementing data mesh. For example, you have data in the data lake, and you don't want to build a table. You don't want to build a cluster. From using the serverless, you can right-click on the file and then start writing SQL codes. Start checking if the data is clean. Start checking if the data can be integrated. And you can go further, expand to it by kind of creating the tables on top of data in the lake. And let's say, for example, Power BI use this data and just basically import the data in Power BI. So it's the simplest way to kind of enable dashboards and reports. And last but not the least that we have here is time series, right? We have Azure Data Explorer, a standalone service. We actually tied it inside Synapse as well, so you don't have to stitch them together. So any use cases around time series data coming from sensors, from oil and gas, for example, they have historian environments, so we can stream that data from historian all the way to ADX. So now you have this cache-based engine. You can write, you can build reports on top of it. It has also machine learning capabilities. So you can do forecasting in real time. You can do anomaly detection in real time, and it's all tightly integrated. And further to that, the governance that we talked about earlier is tightly integrated in Synapse. So from within Synapse, you can look for a metadata. You can look for, a data governance, a data catalog kind of showing, hey, where's my data located? It shows you all this information, the server names, anything that you see in preview, you will see it inside Synapse as well. So you're not jumping, between different tools, different interfaces. It's all integrated. Data sharing, if you want to share data from the data warehouse to the data lake, you can do that. If you're already also in machine learning, if you build some models already in our machine learning service, you can deploy them in Synapse so that you can basically consume those models from within the different capabilities here in Synapse. Last but not the least would be inside Synapse, you can build dashboards and reports. So again, you don't have to leave Synapse to build dashboards and reports. You can do it here, making a lot simpler. So what we're saying here is basically we're simplifying things. We're trying to reduce it. And by doing this, we're reducing the architecture by 70–80%. Synapse becomes a hub. If you need Databricks, we have great kind of like collaboration with Databricks. Databricks is our first party. A lot of our data engineering recommendation is heavy on Databricks, for example. If you want to do machine learning as well, machine learning has Databricks kind of capabilities, very, very solid capabilities. So we have this. Plus, if you want to go further with other ML ops, or kind of like how do you operationalize your machine learning, you can add some of these services, so on and so forth. So now it's a lot simpler, right? You're not stitching a lot more kind of services. You use Synapse plus the other kind of like capabilities to build this simplified architecture within the domain, right? So the goal is to kind of like, hey, now because we use Synapse plus other services to complement it, we're simplifying it, right? We have governance in the middle. We have automated services that we discussed, kind of like enabling kind of like data coming from the raw sources to the Delta Lake, and then the polyglot store being the lake. So we have this kind of like picture now, right? We went a bit deeper earlier. That's the picture. Now, how about what are the different patterns that we've seen with our clients? So what we've been doing is, as we engage with our clients, we identify some of the projects that they want to implement. For example, a client might have, this is an example, a client FSI, they have 32 projects that they want to get completed in the next 6 months. And we said, hey, you know what? Let's identify these different patterns. So we came up with this 5. Type 0 is ingestion and curation. And an example of this is, yeah, I want data coming from, oh, sorry about that. I want data coming from Oracle, for example. And that's the use case that I kind of mentioned earlier. But there are also use cases where, hey, you know what? I have a Hadoop environment on premise, and I want to start migrating this. Although I only use 20% of the data in this Hadoop environment, I still want to make sure that data is ingested in Azure so that it can be available for future use cases. So there's that, right? Discovery and onboarding, this is where I mentioned earlier, if you have a project and you want to just discover if you have enough data, there are also some ad hoc and analysis need by the different lines of business. They just want to just run queries against data in the data lake, for example, or in SQL databases or in data warehouses, and they just want to do discovery. They're more of like, I'm not building a table, I'm not building anything, I'm more kind of learning mode about our data sets. Number 2 is more on business intelligence. 3 is more around the data science. And 3rd is about data exchange. So data exchange could be across organization, it could be across a different organization. For example, we have a client where they would like to share their data to a third-party vendor because the third party is going to do optimization. So from our data warehouse, the Synapse data warehouse, we were able to share data into the vendor's data lake. So it's not kind of like data warehousing to data warehousing. So we landed in the data lake because it's going to be used for machine learning, right? So how do we deploy this in this modern analytics and governance at scale? So type 0 ingestion and curation is in the middle. All the other ones is served per domain. So you have all of this in these other domains. And what are the different technologies that you can use to do this? For ingestion and curation, of course, Azure Data Factory for batch, IoT Hub for streaming, or Event Hub. We store them in the Delta format in the lake. You can use Synapse or Databricks being heavy, really used for data engineering. So that's why ingestion and curation is here. When it comes to data exploration, you can use Synapse serverless, so you don't have to build tables, servers, for example. You can just right-click on the file and then write SQL. For descriptive analytics, we have Synapse for data warehousing and the other capabilities that we talked about, Spark, ADX for streaming in Synapse. There we have clients that are still using SQL databases for data marts because they have small data sets for some of the lines of businesses that they just leverage that without having to build data warehouses, for example. And of course, Databricks, we have so much capabilities here, the Delta tables, the SQL analytics, what have you. So we got these options, right? Plus, of course, Power BI for dashboards and reports. Machine learning would be this services. I'm not going to have to drain them all of them, but as you can see, we have now alignment because we have built this domain, and you can say, I need patterns related to number 1, type 1 on discovery and onboarding. I need machine learning, and you can just deploy these different services, right? You probably don't have to worry about these other things, but in the end, we're enabling the different lines of business with this technology aligned to the processes that we talked about, and the people from the different lines of businesses and IT deployment is basically aligned that, hey, this is the thing that we're going to be doing. Now, as to, Lakehouse being our go-to kind of like architecture that we recommend, how data mesh can be implemented with Lakehouse in mind, right? This is basically a different perspective, but similar, very similar, actually exactly the same from the previous one. I'm just calling out how Lakehouse is really transparent in here. Is that, hey, we know we're going to be using Purview for governance, or if you have already existing data governance tools, feel free to continue with those, as long as the capabilities for governance, you meet them and you're happy with it, all good. Automated data ops, you're using Data Factory and Databricks, and then inside the lines of businesses, you have these different services. In the middle, where you store most of your data, will be the Delta Lake. And then each of the line of businesses will have their own containers so that they have their own space where they can, merge data, build data products, and this becomes shareable to the other domains, if you will. Now, so I think for this, I'm just going to go directly to how we actually align with data mesh. So data mesh, so we said that we're going to be building this multiple domains, hub in the middle with governance, automated services, and data stores. Data mesh, if you look at the literature, the books, what have you, there's three architecture planes. One is mesh experience plane, one is the data product experience plane, and then the third one is the utility plane. How do we align? Is the mesh experience plane is aligned to our data governance. The data product experience plane is related to our automated data operations. And then the utility plane, where you have the polyglot, the networking, CI/CD is tied to the domains, and of course the polyglot in the middle. So what Microsoft have done, over the past few months, over a year now actually, is we evaluated how we are actually building our own environment and other clients, and how it aligns to data mesh, because it's been asked of us, what is Microsoft positioning? So we evaluated each of these planes, and based on our kind of like workshops, what have you, what we've implemented, what we've learned, these are the different capabilities to meet the different planes in data mesh in our own implementations. We prioritize them. By the way, this is just a shorter list of what we have kind of gathered. This is just an example and how we're actually working with our partners to say, hey, this is the Microsoft modern analytics and governance at scale aligned to data mesh, and these are the capabilities. So we build some of these capabilities with our partners if, say, this capability is not available in our product or in our future releases. So that's the goal, right? So that's how we align with data mesh. And then how do we implement here, right? So we have accelerators for clients. If you want to start building your domains, we have accelerators to do this. We have technical architecture, which I'm not going to cover here due to time, and maybe that's another follow-up conversation, getting into the deeper dives of how the architecture would look like at the level 400, talking about networking, talking about how do you build the lake, what are the services, how do you monitor, how do you CI/CD, we have all of that, right? But for now, I'm going to share, we have all this kind of like accelerators so that you can start building your domains. In terms of governance, what we have is Purview. So you can deploy Purview. We have a lot of guidance on how to deploy it. Polyglot data store, this is, foundational is Delta Lake, which we have so much guidance as well. We have GA, data lake storage accounts, if you will, that you can deploy. Early access engineering solutions. This is our kind of like engagement within organization, within one of the organizations in Microsoft, where we can co-build IPs. We have IPs that we can share with you based on industry, for example. These are just example of some of the solution accelerators. But happy to co-innovate with you, connect with us, and more than happy to share some of these IPs. Last but not the least, for partner delivery would be the automated data operations, right? Which is related to operations console, data agnostic ingestion, data engineering foundation. So we've been onboarding our partners to kind of how do we actually package this that is aligned to Microsoft recommendations. So they already have IPs ready to deploy. But that being said, I've seen clients as well who has existing implementations, for example, in ingestion, in data engineering. So for them, they just have to adjust a few things or kind of fill in some of the gaps, and they have this automated data operations, right? So, we have strong partners to help you, but at the same time, if you're already building this on your own, happy to collaborate, how you can continue, so on and so forth. Now, I'm just gonna jump into the implementation stages. So we got the strategy, we got the solutions, the concepts, the architecture, all the way to the accelerators. How do we guide our clients moving forward, right? So what we said is like, hey, you know what, for you to kind of evolve to federation, to get into the governance of it, to get into the template-based implementation environment, it's always recommended to start with an assessment, kind of understanding what's your current architecture. What are the different services that you have now, like data services? Do you have ingestion services? Do you have data engineering services or exploration services, right? And then understanding what you have now. And then from there, how do we evolve to the future? So here is now, after understanding all of that, partners, we involve partners, by the way, important for the assessment, is we recommend MVPs and how we prioritize them, how it is aligned with our roadmap, right? And then getting into the implementation, You can have an MVP related to the foundation, which is building out the data lake or expanding your delta lake, right? Template creation so that we can build the domains. That could be one MVP. Another MVP could be around the data governance. So if you have no governance tools implemented, you don't, or if you have existing, maybe you need to expand it. That could be related to MVP number 2. The third one could be around the ingestion. How do you, do the data agnostic ingestion, the data engineering, and basically could be a third or fourth MVP, right? What we're saying here is if you want to accelerate, because now we provide you our recommendation, our vision, and a lot of IPs. You can actually run these MVPs in parallel for phase 1 and then get into phase 2 and get into phase 3. So this is just a sample of that we can share with you. We have clients, for example, where they said, hey, you know what, metadata management is important for us. We wanted this to be in phase 1. We can do that, right? These are just very high level, a lot of details that we didn't put here, but just to kind of give you a picture on how do we implement given our strategy, the solutions that we recommend, all the way down to the architecture and the services that we provide to kind of tie all of this together as a package is our goal. So as to the next step, I just want to call it out, learn about, building innovation culture using data-driven business strategy. You can go to this link, engage with us, engage with Microsoft, and our specialized partners using this link, aks.ms/contact-ms. With that, I'll leave some of this kind of like, a few minutes for questions. I don't see the questions, so please, Mark or team, please help me if there's any questions. I'll stop sharing.
Currently, we do have one question, which is, will you be able to will we be able to get a copy of the presentation deck so that we can share it with other folks who might want to peruse it at their own leisure?
Absolutely. We are going to share this deck after this event.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I've put the call out for other questions, but currently it looks like there's not a lot from the audience.
Yeah, I was thinking Mark probably has a lot of questions.
Well, I want to congratulate Emerson. Thank you so much. This was, you supplied a lot of technical information in a very structured manner that just flowed beautifully. So thank you for that, for sharing that with everyone here. I think everybody who's participated in this session has seen that, again, the disciplines of data management governance, that includes architecture, architectural patterns. You talked about patterns, you talked about planes, you talked about phases, you talked about accelerators. You covered all the various elements of, how you would actually use data mesh, right, as an architectural principle in a modern data platform. So wonderful, and thank you. And obviously, probably a lot of people were taking screenshots and they'll value the presentation. I'll remind everybody that this will be posted on YouTube. They can look at that later. Emerson, when you think about, and you've been around a while as well as have I in this field, and if you look at how things have been evolving, obviously technology, computing power, all these other partners that you referenced as well, in addition to Microsoft's growing capabilities in Azure, these are some of the, what's different. Where do you see this all going? If you want to maybe just give us a little bit of a glimpse into the future.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of kind of like angles that we can think about where this is going. From a technology perspective, the goal is to how do we simplify the data stores? Because back, we had this conversation 20 years ago. We're talking about Oracle, SQL, and kind of like very siloed, and you pick your kind of like favorite, and then basically, how do you call this? And then commit to it, right? Here, where open source is such a big player for us, right? How do we make sure that, like say, the Delta Lake, I'm happy to hear that Delta is now, open source, fully open source in 2.0. So technology-wise, it's all about the open source. The second one is how do we kind of serve more data to the lines of businesses? If you go back to the challenges that the different organizations are saying, they don't have access to data, right? Very commonly, data science team, they need access to raw data, all data, what have you. But a lot of organizations are still struggling to kind of serve that data. And because of what? Because of data management, lack of data management, right? The lack of governance and making sure data is secure. That's the only reason why they are skeptical in serving that data. So Mark, as you're aware, I presented as well in the Gartner in London. I would say all of the sessions there is about data management. Not all, most of it. I'm surprised how much data management is there. How a specific company, Netflix, for example, evolved from becoming this company to becoming company. It's part of that culture, right? There's a lot of conversation on how you kind of be, enabling lines of businesses using governance, right? Serving that data. So to your point, this community is getting more critical as we move forward. A lot of data management conversation. Microsoft is talking about data management now. Before we talk about warehousing, we talk about Spark, we talk about big data or modern data warehouse, right? So I think it's good for us to focus on the data management, on enabling the different lines of businesses from that perspective. Technology, we are for Microsoft really kind of like evolving our kind of like implementation around open sourcing. How do we kind of enable the different lines of businesses? We provide a lot of capabilities, right? But are focusing and making sure all of this business projects will actually execute, and we can't execute without foundations, data operations, governance, data management, right? So it's now kind of like becoming one piece, if you will.
I think that's well said. And I'm seeing the same thing as a practitioner in the industry. We say that data engineers are the unicorns everybody's looking for. We don't have enough. But guess what? I'm hearing from my clients across industries, hey, do you have data architects? Do you have data modelers? Do you have data governance specialists? And we're seeing that we don't have enough of these professionals. And obviously, training and certification is important in that. So I think, again, what's the things that we learned in the late 90s, early 2000s, et cetera, launching mission critical platforms, those are leveraged, and then we're building upon them. So I'll remind everybody that's kind of watching and listening in. We have DAMA days coming in a few months, and you'll get more information about that. We have Bill Inman will be talking as well, and what's his perspective on how the things are evolving. So look forward to that.
Okay,
Nick, any other questions?
Yeah? Yes, we do. So the first question is, if a business currently uses AWS for operations, how well could some of Azure's data services you presented without having to change to Azure for ops, e.g. Power BI works well with data stores on AWS?
Sorry, I just would like to make sure the context of the question. So how the Microsoft recommended practices will play well with AWS? Is that a good summary of that?
I believe that's what they're asking, yes.
Okay. So the good thing about what we're recommending is probably 80% of our recommendation is processes, right? And if you think about the foundational aspect of, how do we enable the different lines of businesses, is that building that domain, right? So if the data, for example, is in AWS, in their data lake, and you're already using Power BI, the simplest use case is I want to build dashboards and reports for my business, but the data is in AWS. And you can use Power BI to connect to it, and then now you meet your goals, right? Think about the output you're going to get. So you're on the right track. Now, if you want to start becoming bigger, for example, let's say I want to build a domain, right, in AWS, and then you can do that, not familiar with how they build their environments, what have you, then you can build a domain there, consume that data in the data lake. But if you say, hey, I want to start using some of the capabilities in Azure, like Synapse, for example, what have you, I would recommend to kind of start making a decision as to how do you balance your data. Because one thing that I would like to really challenge here is not because your data is in AWS that you're going to be fully committed that I'm just going to commit to AWS. If you find that there are capabilities in Microsoft side, thinking about having data in two sides, right? A lot of our clients, and this is where that multi-cloud play is happening, they can use a primarily cloud provider and then use as the secondary. So you have a copy here as your primary, and then you can use it as a backup, for example, right? But that being said, but because you're using the data in the backup, maybe in AWS or Azure, what have you, you can leverage the capabilities of this secondary cloud provider as your enabler for the different lines of businesses. So you're hitting two kind of purposes with one stone, right? One is you have multi-cloud, you have a backup, but at the same time, you're enabling analytics on top of that as part of your backup, right? So from a strategy perspective, we'd love to kind of deeper, feel free to connect with us. I've seen it, by the way. Mesh is not just one cloud, it's kind of becoming like multi-cloud as well. Happy to share some of that insight. As a matter of fact, I have an architecture that I can share with you on that one.
Okay, thank you so much. And one more question from the chat. Can you please elaborate more about data exchange patterns/use cases and implementation approach where you see clients succeed in the tech recommended by Microsoft? Example, data share ADF or Databricks.
Right. So data sharing from a Microsoft perspective, and we know the Databricks is our first party, so have their data sharing. But from a use case perspective, what we believe in terms of data sharing is don't get locked by a proprietary storage, meaning data sharing should not only be data warehouse to data warehouse, because when you do data warehouse to data warehouse, you're only doing reports to reports. What about machine learning? What about streaming, right? So data sharing use cases should be open in a way that it could be data coming from a data warehouse and then landed into a Delta Lake or a data lake. And then from there, you can use this for other use cases, for machine learning, for example, what have you, right? Start training, what have you. So in terms of data sharing, you can say that it depends on industry. I have seen, let me think about one industry that resonates well. I think a use case is more an example that I shared earlier, that we have companies that, because optimization is not an easy thing to do with some of the companies that we work with. So they kind of like get a vendor to do optimization for them. It's much more complicated than just data science. So that's data sharing is making sure your data, whether it is in Lake, DB, what have you, or data warehouse, that it lands to this other landing environment, a vendor, for example, so that they can do flexibility when it comes to their own optimization, mostly data coming from the data lake, right? So that's a sample of sharing that more ideal than warehouse to warehouse, for example, or lake to lake only.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emerson. Yeah, we're just going to wrap up now. So I did want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today, and thanks everyone for all of the thoughtful questions. Emerson, thank you so much for joining us today. That was a fascinating presentation, and there's a lot to mull over. So I'm sure folks are going to be following up with the resources that you provided and are going to be poring over the slides again. But yeah, we're at time. So Mark, I don't think you had any last words. So with that, I'm just going to say thanks, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Okay,
Thank you.
consider it cut there.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was excellent.
Yeah, thanks so
Thank
much,
you, guys.
Emerson. Yeah, that was a
good.
really, really excellent presentation.
Guys, how many people did we have participating that we know of? Because I know the stream, you can have multiple people in a room and things like that, and we'll have other viewers on on the recorded thing on on YouTube later on. But were we